All right, we're live now.
Thank you. Good evening to you, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry for the delay. We had some difficulties. My name is Kasim Ali. I'm the chair of the Housing and Community Select Committee, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us this meeting. This meeting is being held in accordance with the government guidance that we can do virtual meetings, and everyone is recommended to stay at home as much as they can do. I would also like to notice everyone that this event is being live streamed, and media and the residents from RBKC can join us. Before I start the actual meeting, I would like to also know everyone that who is attending today, and actually welcome everyone who is quite new to the program and to virtual meeting for RBKC, as well as any listeners, viewers who are interested to know about RBKC's housing and communities. Before I start with the event, I would like to mention that housing is an important issue for RBKC, and we have the biggest disaster in the country when Grenfell Tower happened. And I would like the councillors, as well as the members of the public and anyone who's listening to this, to remember and pay respect for the 72 people that we have lost at the Grenfell disaster. So please do join me, and the officers will be counting for the seconds, for 72 seconds to be silent and pay the respect. Thank you. Thank you very much for all of you. Before I start the meeting, I would like to get just to mention the councillors. Please do switch on your on and off when you have to speak. Of course, when you speak, you will put your camera on, and of course you will unmute yourself. But when you're not addressing the meeting, please mute yourself and also leave the switch off the camera so that we can have a good connection. And in the meantime, if councillors who are here now, yes, to assist when speaking to when addressing to the meeting, to assist members of the public as well as councillors and officers, please do start with your name and your position, and then that will be easy for everyone to recognize and make a note of what you have just said. And in the meeting, in the event of network connection happens, a bad connection for the meeting, as it just happened to me. I was in a meeting earlier with the officers and Vice Chair, Councillor Greg Hammond, and my laptop was working perfectly. But as soon as I was joining the meeting, laptop crashed. And so if it happens to me, and now I'm using the second device in the house just to make sure that I'm on this meeting and sharing and going through. If it happens to me again, or it happens to Greg Hammond, will be the chair. I nominate him to be the chair of the meeting. And if also Greg, and the unlikely event that Greg also experienced a bad connection, I would like to nominate Councillor Mo Bakhtiar to chair the meeting. But before I say that again, I would like to make sure that the councillors who are here today at this evening for this meeting. So I'll start myself, of course, I'm here. And Councillor Greg Hammond, if you are here, please could you switch on your camera and wave to show your presence and declare at the same time if there is any interest of this meeting.
Yes, good evening, Chair. I'm Greg Hammond. I'm Councillor for Courtfield Ward in South Kensington. I'm Vice Chair of this committee and I have nothing to declare.
Thank you. And Councillor Hamish Adurian, please.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Hamish Adurian, Councillor for Earls Court Ward. And I apologise for my camera this evening. It seems to be playing up.
Thank you. Councillor Mo Bakhtiar.
Good evening, everyone. This is Councillor Mo Bakhtiar. I am St. Helens Councillor and a member of this committee. Thank you.
Councillor Tom Bennett.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Tom Bennett, Councillor for Redcliffe Ward, nothing to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Robert Freeman.
I'm Robert Freeman. I'm Councillor for Camden Ward and I have no declarations to make.
Thank you. Councillor Dori Schmetterling.
Good evening. I'm Dori Schmetterling. I'm Councillor for Pembridge Ward, which is just north of Notting Hill Gate, for those not so familiar with this area, and I have nothing to declare.
Thank you. Thank you all. And again, I am Councillor Kasim Ali, Chair of this committee, and I am also a Councillor for Delgado Ward. And I have interest to declare. I have tenants for a council property, and that is the interest that I would like to declare. Thank you. To the next one. Yes, we have a long agenda for this evening, and I would also like to start with A1 for the members to recognize the chair and the vice chair as it's been agreed at the May 2020 council meeting. The next item on the agenda is apologies. I don't think we have any apologies as we have most of the members present at the meeting, and we've also dealt with A3. That's the declaration of interest, and A4 is the minutes of the meeting that has been held December 16th or the 16th of December 2019, and also a special meeting held on the 2nd of March 2020. I would like members to agree to sign off these two meetings that has been held.
Agreed.
Right, thank you. Everyone has agreed this, and we will sign off as the correct the meeting that has been held.
Bearing in mind, only I was present.
I can't imagine. Thank you, Councillor.
Yes.
And yes, you were the only one. And for that reason, we had two meetings. I organized, thanks to the officers, that we had one meeting for just the new committee, Housing and Communities Select Committee, to get together, and we had a wonderful meeting to talk about for the year ahead. And also we had another meeting with the lead members. So again, I'd like to thank the lead members for both the housing and communities for taking the time to meet with my committee and give us updates, since we have quite very diverse but also new committee, as we haven't been into housing and communities. The next slide, please. At this one, we have A5. We have a speaker from University College London, Dr. Saffron Woodcroft from UCL Institute for Global Prosperity, and she's also the lead person for London Prosperity Board. Dr. Saffron is a really good friend of mine, as well as a colleague, a former colleague at the University College London, and she has been leading prosperity and what it means, prosperity in London. So her talk will be talking about today will be about housing, communities, and the role of prosperity. So Saffron has been involved not just in this central London, but also in East London, and she has been carrying out amazing research in terms of what makes communities more prosperous, what is prosperity to them. And we know the inequality that we have in the RBKC, the wealthiest borough, at the same time some of the hardest, some of the worst hit or the worst communities in the country. We will find out in due course. But what we want to know is the research and how we can implement the work that has been done in the past, and what can we do as a community and also as a councillors, as well as to take examples that has been done in the country. Dr. Safran, thank you very much for taking the time. I know if coronavirus did not take place, or coronavirus hasn't happened, the pandemic, you would have been in Havana today, but and doing some wonderful research in there. But we are lucky to have you, and hopefully you will do the research that you will be doing in Havana or in Cuba. And again, once again, thank you for your time, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. That's a really lovely introduction as well. Thank you, Kasim. And it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here this evening. I'm just going to take control of the slideshow now, if that's okay.
Please do.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about this evening is a research program that I've been running in East London since 2015. So as Kasim introduced, the purpose of the research has been to explore what prosperity means to communities, specifically to communities in and around the Olympic Park in East London. So we've been using interesting methods that have brought citizens directly into the research process and programme, and also working through the London Prosperity Board, both of which I will say a bit more about in a moment. It's 5 years worth of research, so there's a lot to say about prosperity. But what I'm going to do this evening is just focus specifically on the headline findings from the research that look at housing and the really important role that housing plays in supporting prosperity for communities in East London. So the research that I'm describing is led by the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL, but it's really a collaborative effort. So what you can see on the screen at the moment are all the different partners that are involved in the London Prosperity Board. And the London Prosperity Board is a multi-stakeholder partnership. It's a group of organisations from local government, from the GLA, from public agencies, the third sector, private sector organisations, who all in different ways have an interest in the future prosperity of neighbourhoods in East London, either because they're delivering services, they're making investments, they're in partnership with organisations like the GLA and strategic regeneration programmes, or they're working directly as anchor community organisations and voluntary and community sector groups to support people living and working in East London. So this partnership way of working is a particularly important aspect of the research programme. And the way that it works is that we're trying to develop together a new way of thinking about what prosperity means for communities in East London, that starts from the experience of residents and from the experience of particular communities, and to bring those experiences into the process of policy making and planning and thinking about investment programs, and really to collectively develop a shared evidence base that this group of institutions, but also wider organisations interested in East London, can bring to their own thinking about what they do to act for prosperity. And the reason that we're focused on this collective shared evidence development is that when we talk about prosperity from a policy point of view, it tends to be understood in the context of economic growth, industrial policy, and the way that then flows down into kind of local government policy is a focus on enterprise and job growth and income improvement at a community level. So what we're trying to do with this collaborative partnership, but also with the citizen researchers that I will talk about a bit more in a moment, is to question that idea, to challenge that idea by saying, well, what does prosperity mean? What does prosperity policy look like if we start from the perspective of particular communities and their experiences and challenges? So the research that I'm going to talk about this evening has been running for 5 years. It started in 3 neighbourhoods, so in Hackney Wick and Forest Gate and East Village, which was the athletes' village in the Olympic Park. It expanded in 2017 to include other neighbourhoods in Stratford and Dagenham, and it's expanding again. So the next wave of research, which we will collect in the spring 2021, will include more neighbourhoods in Stratford, more neighbourhoods in Hackney, and also expanding the work to Waltham Forest as well. So we're trying to explore what this idea of prosperity means from the perspective of lots of different types of communities in East London. So the headline research question, I suppose, was what would change if communities define prosperity and those locally developed definitions are used to develop measures of prosperity that are then track progress and are used to inform policy and planning. So the beginning of the research focused very much on in-depth qualitative explorations of the idea of prosperity, what it meant to individuals, what it meant to community organisations and to resident networks in these neighbourhoods, and also exploring in a lot of detail what was it that what supports and what prevents individual households and local communities from being able to prosper. And then to kind of take that research and to identify a set of local priorities that can be then used to develop different kinds of prosperity metrics. So moving away from the idea that prosperity can only be measured through GDP and through job growth programs, to bring in a much wider set of ideas about the determinants of prosperity and different pathways to prosperity. So when we started the work, the focus on the Olympic Park was because one of the promises of the Olympic legacy was to close the gap in prospects and prosperity for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged neighbourhoods in East London, and to bring their life chances into line with more affluent areas of London, more affluent areas of the city, within 20 years of the Olympic Games. So given the kind of high levels of multiple deprivation in East London, this is a really ambitious goal. So we wanted specifically to start with this aspiration and to explore from a community perspective what that would mean, to ensure that then we could bring these ideas into policy and practice. The focus on place-based prosperity has just become more important in the subsequent years that we've been running the research programme. So people, place and prosperity is the key framework for the Good Growth Fund. For example, prosperous communities are listed in the UK Industrial Strategy as one of the key foundations of the Industrial Strategy framework. And that focus on place-based prosperity will obviously then trickle down into London's local industrial strategy too. And all of this focus on place-based prosperity, has been developing in the context of rising inequalities in London, which Kasim has touched on slightly already. So rising inequalities that spread across not only income, but health, housing, all kinds of domains of social life. In-work poverty on the increase, and those and that kind of increase in in-work poverty being linked specifically in London to the high costs of housing. So these are the issues that were kind of driving the focus on re-examining prosperity at this point in time. So what I want to do, just very briefly, is share with you some of the headline findings. First of all, from the qualitative research that we carried out in 2015 and 16. And just to say a little bit about research methods here. There are two things to note about this research, which makes it quite unusual. One is that the research was both designed and carried out with what we call citizen scientists. So people who are living in the neighborhoods where we were working, who didn't necessarily have research experience, but were interested in these issues, who we then trained and employed to work alongside the academic team at UCL. And the citizen scientists were absolutely critical to this research. Not only did they collect the data and the interviews, but they also helped us to design the questions, to interpret the data, and make sure that the research was relevant to the neighborhoods where we were carrying out the research. So citizen science kind of underpins the research program that we've been running for the last 5 years. And the other thing to note from a methods point of view is that we wanted this research to really reflect the experience of individuals, and for them to be able to use their own words and their own kind of ideas and their own experiences to address the question about what prosperity means and what supports and prevents it. So we deliberately designed very kind of open research methods so people could talk at length about their own experience. So what you can see here is a graphic representation of the top 10 most common themes that emerged from that initial research. So as citizen scientists, there were 10 of them, working with 10 academic researchers, collected over 250 long qualitative interviews in the 3 neighborhoods initially. So what you can see here is the 10 most common themes that emerged from those 250 interviews. The largest bar on the left is priority number 1, smallest bar on the right is priority number 10. So what you can see is that the biggest bar is about a secure livelihood. So secure livelihoods were understood to be the absolutely critical foundation of prosperity for people living in East London. But what's interesting about the idea of a livelihood is that people talked about 2 interrelated elements in livelihood security. One was about secure income, whether that was good quality work or volunteering activities in combination with welfare, but secure income. And the second element of a secure livelihood was about secure and genuinely affordable housing. And what was interesting for us about this research is that when people talked about these 2 things, they were so closely interrelated that you couldn't separate them. That housing was understood to be so critical that it wasn't jobs first and income first, even though that was obviously really important. It was about having the 2 things together, because housing provided a secure base for people to be able to plan and make decisions about their future that needed to be considered alongside work and income. So what I'm going to do now is, I haven't put this on the screen, but this quote that I'm going to read is available in the report that we launched last year about this work. What I want to do is just share with you one quote from the work. And this was from an interview with someone called Frances, a woman in her 50s who had lived in Hackney for 20 years. And I want to share this quote because it really captures the points that so many people made during the research. So it's very typical of the way that people talked about the importance of housing and work together. So she said, "How can we have a prosperous life for everyone, people of all classes? The situation is precarious for people around here. the combination of unaffordable housing, 0 hours contracts, portfolio careers, people have no security. This is a toxic mix. So that kind of interrelationship was very commonly found in the research that we undertook. So what you can see on this chart is then, I'm just highlighting priorities 2, 3, and 4. And I want to kind of pull these out because they're very strongly linked to housing as well. So people talked about secure livelihoods in relation to having a good quality of life. Secure livelihoods, and specifically the housing aspect of secure livelihoods in relation to being able to stay in the neighbourhood, which is point number 3, and feel part of the community, point number 4. And point number 3 about being able to stay in the neighbourhood is a really interesting one in the context of regeneration programmes, where in the Olympic Park, housing costs were rising. There's a lot of pressure on people locally because of an increase in private rental accommodation and insufficient supply of affordable and social housing. So people were very anxious about whether they would be able to afford to stay in the neighbourhood, where they had really critical social support networks and social infrastructure that then made it possible for them to cope with the insecurity of 0 hours contracts. So one of the issues that people talked about a lot was the difficulty of childcare if you're in very insecure employment and unpredictable employment. It makes it very difficult to plan, and people talked a lot about needing to kind of call on their neighbours for informal support in order to be able to take up 0 hours shifts. And that idea that these are all kind of essential parts, essentially, of what people called foundations of prosperity. So what I will show you on the next slide, those 2 previous slides identified and kind of visualized the top 10 themes that came out of the research, but there were lots of other issues that emerged as well. And what we've tried to do here, this is a visual representation of the prosperity model that the citizen scientists developed based on the qualitative work. So what they were doing here was looking at all the different elements of prosperity as they're lived and experienced by residents in East London, how they relate to each other, and therefore what should be measured if we want to understand both how prosperous neighbourhoods are feeling, or where there are specific needs for intervention, policy changes, investment, etc. And because we're short of time, I just want to focus here on one of these domains, and that's the foundations of prosperity domain, which is in the middle of the model that the citizen scientists developed. And there's a couple of points to make here. One is that I've already talked about the way that secure income and secure and meaningfully affordable, genuinely affordable in local terms, housing is really critical. But what's interesting is the distinction that people made between these components being their foundations of prosperity and then other aspects of prosperity depending on those foundations being in place. So what we can kind of draw from that then is that secure livelihoods as defined by local people, inclusion in the social and economic life of the city, change in the neighbourhood, creating some kind of value for local communities are seen as absolutely critical pathways and aspects of prosperity. So what we want to talk about on this slide is just to show you then what we've done to translate that qualitative work that was done by the citizen scientists into a different way of conceptualizing prosperity, and then measuring it in East London. So we've developed something that the London Prosperity Board calls the Prosperity Index. This is a new set of prosperity metrics, the first set of prosperity metrics in the UK to be based on lived experience and to be developed by citizen scientists. So a very different way of thinking about how we measure prosperity and how we kind of look at progress towards prosperous places. So what this screen is showing you is a dashboard that presents the results of a household survey. So the first phase of work was based on a kind of semi-structured exploration of lived experience that was all about the words and experiences of local communities. The second phase of research was about developing a household survey tool that would enable us to systematically investigate, measure, and compare those local priorities across different neighbourhoods. And what you can see is there are 5 different neighbourhood research sites that the Prosperity Index focuses on. And what we've done is index the household survey results on a kind of 10-point index. So 1 is very poor, 10 is very good. We've then given them a RAG rating, so a red, amber, green rating. So red and orange are showing that these neighbourhoods are doing much worse than the Greater London average. And yellow is in line with the Greater London average. And then light green and dark green are significantly better. So what you can see here is just the dashboard for the foundations of prosperity domain. And I just want to kind of make a couple of points because I know we're quite short of time. And these relate specifically to housing and housing affordability and the really complicated strategies that people have put in place in order to be able to cope with livelihood insecurity. So I've just circled on the graphic the housing and household security aspects of the Prosperity Index. And the top line, real household disposable income. This is a new measure that was developed based on the qualitative work that communities and citizen scientists said was absolutely critical. That what they wanted was to be able to demonstrate that the conventional way of assessing disposable household income, which didn't take into account housing costs, didn't take into account utility bills, didn't take into account all kinds of other essential costs, they really wanted to kind of bring that to the fore and to develop a different measure. So there was a much better, more representative way of exploring the relationship between real disposable household income and housing affordability. So the top line, which is all red, which means these neighbourhoods are doing significantly worse than the Greater London average, is looking at household disposable income. So the household survey involved 750 households, and it was about 29% of those households across the 5 sites had less than £200 a month disposable income, compared to the London median, which the Labour Force survey says is in the region of £1,200 a month. So significantly less household disposable income if you look at it in this very different way. The other thing that's important to note is that the Olympic Park sites, in particular, but also parts of Hackney Wick too, have a real mix of households in the neighbourhood. So we're not looking just at very deprived and disadvantaged neighbourhoods. We're looking at a kind of mix of neighbourhoods where people have all kinds of different jobs, different income, are living in their own houses, in private rented accommodation, in affordable and social housing too. But yet still across the board, we could see that levels of household income were very low. And the qualitative research that we ran alongside this identified that this was primarily to do with housing affordability in these areas, and there being a lack of housing that was genuinely affordable in local terms, as opposed to affordable in policy terms. So I'm conscious that we're running out of time, so I just wanted to make one other point on this slide before I wrap up. And that's really to talk about the importance of social support networks and social infrastructure in the communities where we were carrying out the research. Because what we found is that because of the high levels of livelihood insecurity, both work and housing costs and housing insecurity, local support networks are really bearing the burden of that insecurity. So both voluntary and community sector organisations were really having to do a lot to support neighbourhoods, both in terms of financial advice, food banks, all kinds of like frontline services. But then alongside this, there was also a very high burden on informal social networks in the neighbourhood too. So neighbours and friends and kind of immediate family being called on to kind of fill the gaps, basically, in local services and help people to manage that burden. So I'm just going to make a couple of takeaway points before I finish. And I just wanted to say, I think when we look at prosperity as a lived experience rather than as a policy goal, so if we look at it based on what people say about prosperity, their experiences and their aspirations, rather than as a policy goal, then we get a very different picture of the priorities and determinants of prosperity. And that then gives us a different set of potential pathways and interventions to explore. I hope you can see from this research that housing is really critical. It's really interesting because policy discourse on livelihoods tends to focus on jobs and income. And what we can see here is that there's a much wider set of issues of which housing is kind of the foundation and the root which connect people to place and to public services and to local support networks. So I will finish there and hand back over to Kasim. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Kasim.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we stop screen sharing, please? Who was Tom? Okay, let me get back to, yeah, here we go.
Yep, there you go.
Thank you very much. Can you please all join me thanking Dr. Saffron Woodcraft, please, for amazing, really enjoyed one talk. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, and for making the time to meet us, and of course virtually, but hopefully we will invite you back to the council, and we'll have a long session. As you mentioned, prosperity is the key, and communities, housing, and prosperities are all interconnected. And what we want to do, hopefully, as a council, to move forward and to improve the lives of our communities, those who are well off and those who require our support. And I think the way we're heading in the long term is a responsibility that we only have to stand for and support the local community, whether it's giving them an opportunity to get employment so that they can pay for good housing, or train them. As you've said, citizen-led prosperity is the way forward, and I'm sure our council will learn a lot from it. The way we will ask questions will be, of course, I will start as the chair, and then followed by the committee members and any other councillors who are at the committee, followed by the members of the public. However, I would like to mention to the members of the public and any councillors who are listening today that only please put the letter Q for a question in the chat. It will not be fair for others who are listening who cannot contribute to be sidelined. So, and therefore, please, there's no discussion on the chat. Just put a question, and I will be able to get through to you, and hopefully you will be able to ask questions in that sense. Saffron, if I start with the question side of it, what can we do as a council, or what's the requirement to join the network of Prosperity-led or London Prosperity Board? I think in the long term, it will be interesting, of course, that the council leaders have to make the decision, but what will be the requirement for us to join and to learn more about it and have that connection with other London councils and local associations, as well as learning from what has been done in the past, so that we can implement similar issues and learn from it and give our the opportunity that our borough residents, our residents deserve in terms of jobs, in terms of housing, and in terms of communities that link together. And this time is needed more than ever because of what we have gone through Granville for the last 3 years, as well as the COVID-19. So it's yours, please.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to say. So the London Prosperity Board is set up as an open innovation network. So the only requirements for participation are that the partners are working with communities in the neighbourhoods of interest to us, although those, and that they're committed to innovation. And that means different things for different types of organisation. So for example, for our local authority partners, we ask for commitments of officer time and to take seriously the research findings, and then to work in collaboration with voluntary sector, other public agencies, private sector organisations in the specific neighbourhoods to both respond, and those responses can be different kinds of policy frameworks, they can be small-scale community-based interventions, they can be other kinds of networking activities. So just to give you two really quick examples. So for example, Hackney Council we've worked with very closely. They've been involved in research since 2014. Their response was to incorporate these ideas about a more holistic into their inclusive economies strategy and policy. So thinking both about the methods, so the citizen science and the lived experience focused research, and how that can be translated into an economic policy that doesn't focus just on jobs, that also recognises that housing is a critical part of that work, and that social inclusion is a critical part of that work. So some responses can be a kind of strategic policy. We also work very closely with Dagenham, who've done a number of things, but one of their responses was to take the data and to look very closely at what was going on in the one neighbourhood where the research was carried out, and to develop a specific local community project that responded to very high levels of debt and financial stress and food poverty. So the idea is very much that this is about research for innovation, it's research for impact, and we work with in different ways. And
you are muted, Safran.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Did I just mute myself?
Yes, you did. Just the last sentence.
Okay. Yeah. So we ask that. Partners are committed to innovation, and they will take seriously the research, and they will act on it. Essentially, just very quickly, I would just add one other thing, which is that they're involved in the co-design of the research program and the innovation program as well. So this is not UCL coming along and saying we want to do research about Hackney Wick. It's about working in partnership. We are about to launch a similar approach with Camden Council that's focused on Euston and neighbourhoods around Euston. So what we're trying to do is develop a kind of knowledge network and sharing network where the methods and the insights can be kind of openly accessible to lots of different organisations.
So the scientists, citizen scientists, will be recruiting locally, as you're doing now in Camden. If it happens in Kensington, it will be recruited, and the skills they learn, there will be skills that are transferable to the world when they want to use for other reasons. Thank you. I'll move on to the council. Sorry, you were saying something, Safran?
Oh, no, it's fine.
Okay, I'll move it to the, I think the second question is from Councillor Greg Hammond, the Vice Chair for the committee. Greg, it's yours.
Thanks very much, Safran, for your presentation. Now, I work in Stratford on a on a 0 hours contract, as it happens quite regularly, at least when we're not in lockdown. And it's a very different area from the area I live and represent in South Kensington. And both of those areas are different again in massive ways from the area I grew up in, North London in Enfield. So I'm wondering how much from your very detailed research you can extrapolate from these areas of East London to the whole of London, which is a very big and diverse city. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I didn't talk about it this evening because we haven't really had the opportunity. But actually, the research is very based on the specific experience in different neighbourhoods. And what we see is that there is a different prosperity narrative and experience. And what a 0 hours contract means in Forest Gate is quite different to what it means in Hackney Wick. So that very local understanding is really important. And I think one of the questions we're asked often is, well, how can we make a prosperity index for London overall? And my response is that actually, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is develop a citizen-led research and kind of innovation way of working that's more about citizens having a voice in policy and governance. So yes, I've been talking about the research this evening, but actually it's more about the framework that kind of sits around that research and what people do with it and the role that local people have in saying something about their experience and their neighbourhood, and then how that is interpreted within a local authority framework, for example, to other neighbourhoods where you could make inferences about conditions or experiences being the same. So I think what's transferable is the way of working rather than necessarily always the research insights.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other committee members who want to ask a question? Yes, Tom Bennett, Councillor Tom Bennett, please ask your questions.
Oh, I think Emma may be before me, Chair.
I do know, but I will give the preference to the committee members first, and then I will come to the other councillors if that's okay.
Oh, okay, yes, fantastic. Sepron, thank you very much for that. That was very interesting. I was just wondering, what were the most surprising conclusions of your study? What were the findings that you sort of least expected when you started out?
I suppose what was most surprising, although this was not unexpected, but the extent of livelihood insecurity and the really complicated strategies that people were using to cope with livelihood insecurity. Some of that was shocking, even for councillors and local authorities who are very familiar with the kind of levels of deprivation in the neighbourhoods that we're working in. So, for example, the qualitative work identified very high levels of kind of short-term, high-cost debt, informal savings and informal lending activities going on in the neighbourhood. So people being reliant on, food banks and this really incredible kind of social support and social infrastructure that they had to call on in order to kind of cope with the difficulties of, livelihood insecurity. So while the idea that housing being unaffordable and high cost and 0 hours contracts, for example, being major issues, we know that those are issues. We know that those are issues across London. But I think it was the extent of the problem, the depth of the problem, and the really complicated ways that people coped with that. Bringing those kind of strategies into the light was quite useful, I think, in terms of thinking specifically about interventions and particularly the importance of public services in being a really important kind of lever or pathway for prosperity. So,
thank you. I think with time in mind, I will go to now councillors who are not the part of the committee. I think I see Dory. Now, a quick question, if you don't mind, Dory, and then we will go to Emma Dencote after that. Councillor Emma Dencote.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to be reminded of who the citizen scientists were and what their qualifications were. I don't know if you mentioned at the beginning, define what they are and how they got the job.
Yeah, so citizen scientists are people who live in the neighbourhoods where the research is taking place, and they don't necessarily have research qualifications. The people that we worked with had all kinds of different backgrounds. Some had lived in the neighbourhoods for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, worked in voluntary sector, worked in different kinds of backgrounds. What we wanted was people who were really interested in their neighbourhoods and had a good kind of understanding of the local dynamics. And then what we did was employ them, so they were paid, but also take them through a research ethics and methods and kind of management process. So we trained them essentially in social science methods, so they could work as social scientists in their own neighbourhoods, but with UCL giving them a framework and a support.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Emma Duncoat, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I also found it fascinating. Thank you very much, Saffron. I'm just wondering when we're sort of looking ahead, when that kind of research is being done, obviously, ideally, we like to think, okay, well, now we can intervene, now we can do certain things. With so much going on, and you know, this may be echoing some things that some of our Grenfell community members are thinking about, where there is a lot of investment, you're looking for particular results. But when there's so much going on, how do you know what has made a difference and what hasn't? Because, you know, we have very poor wards which have actually got poorer because of austerity, and that other things have happened. Same around Grenfell, a lot of money has gone in. People are still struggling. So, I mean, how do we actually work out what interventions work? How do you measure success and any kind of improvement?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question. We don't have a huge amount of time, but I'll just say a couple of different things. One is that this needs to be longitudinal. So we have run 2 waves of research, but we're planning a kind of 10-year study in East London. We'll be looking at different points in time at different neighbourhood experiences. And I think that's really critical. But the second thing is that a longitudinal study that measures things objectively will tell you what's happening, but it won't tell you why. So the qualitative aspect of the work is really, really important. So I can't emphasize enough how important the citizen scientists are, and that kind of qualitative exploration of what's going on at a particular point in time or over time. So there are lots of different ways that you can do that methodologically. You can have panels, whatever. But to have those two kind of of investigating what is happening is really important.
Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And the last question will be from Abbas, the chair of the Lancaster West Estate. Abbas, please.
Hi, thank you really about all these important informations and facts. We've been fighting for so long to say this stuff, but it's really nice coming from somebody well-educated university, so these are facts, so they're not deniable anymore. So I've got 2 questions. I'm going to have it very quickly. One is we have some TA residents. The rent is like £500 a week. So I would like to tell us what is the way out of this situation. And secondly, you know, when you spoke about the prosperity and all those stuff, if residents living in the properties, they haven't been repaired for so long, and, you know, it's in the state of disrepair, you know, on purposely, you know, they've been done to make them viable for regeneration and this stuff, how these issues can be tackled, because all the time, you know, this is part of the main part of people's life satisfaction. People in our estate and surrounding area, they live 15 to 20 years less life expectancy. Thank you.
So just very quickly, I'm very happy to kind of discuss this at more length, kind of offline perhaps, but I think one of the issues around the cost of rent is around developing housing, developing a definition of affordability that is context specific. So our citizen scientists and residents talked a lot about housing that is affordable in very local terms. So looking at kind of median local income, perhaps for a small area like a lower super app area or a cluster of lower super app areas, rather than just at a borough level, where you lose the kind of nuance of the distribution of costs and the distribution of benefits. So I think having a conversation around what affordable and secure means in a very local context is really, really important. And then thinking about different kinds of models and innovations that can be tested or could be outcomes of that, because affordability as a policy construct across London is very different from something being meaningfully affordable in a local area. And I think to the second point, what we haven't really discussed this evening because it's just not enough time was the importance that people placed on voice and power and influence. So being able to have a voice in shaping the decisions that affect them, affect their neighbourhood, affect their household, and having different kinds of infrastructures to enable that to happen. So some which might be formal kind of engagement and empowerment structures that might be government-led, but with citizen input, and others where residents are really able to take control of their own solutions to particular problems, whether that is a different kind of management or contracting or governance. But those two things together, so having the degree of control and influence that's recognised and is linked back to what communities have said is important to them, is really critical.
Thank you again, Dr. Saffron Woodcroft. I know this topic or this issue actually deserves an evening on its own rather than squeezing in a meeting of other, or let's say, back agenda. So once again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time, and I'm sure my colleagues and the members of the council will also appreciate for your input. And thank you. You may, if you wish, can stay and maybe research questions can come out of what we have an agenda tonight. If not, we thank you for your time.
I would very much like to stay, but unfortunately I have to go and make supper.
we do thank you for your time.
I just wanted to say thank you very much again. And it's been great to talk. Thank you for your questions.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I think that will conclude the item number 5. On item number 6, we have a presentation from the lead member, Councillor Ansaren. And I remember the last time, or at least it's been a good few months since the lead member for communities has been onto the scrutiny meetings. But I do thank her for taking the time to meet my committee in privately and give us more up-to-date of her role and what she has been doing. So, Councillor Ansaren, the platform is yours, and please do welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you also for inviting Dr. Saffron. I think it's really great to hear from external speakers, and I know the community engagement team are definitely going to want to reach out to her. I mean, I think for me, understanding what local authorities can practically do to respond to some of these research findings, that's really where the research comes to life. So I'm sure they'll be reaching out to her to discuss that. And really, I wanted to introduce this paper that we've brought tonight, which is the Community Engagement Update. And the focus really from community engagement rightly over the last few months has been on the COVID-19 response, and particularly the vulnerable and our shielded residents. And our response really, I think, has been rightly built on the lessons of Grenfell and the response to the tragedy, which was very much a community response. And I think one thing that's worked really well for us is the establishment of the Community Resilience Group, which, I say we established, but actually it was established by our partners with us. So I don't think anybody really took the lead on it. And this resilience group is chaired by the local CCG and includes the Kensington and Chelsea Social Council, the Volunteer Centre and AGK working together with us. And I think, one of the benefits of this partnership has been really quite a quick and responsive, it's been a very dynamic response to the emergency, which has been ever changing. And really, we found ourselves with lots of different needs changing all the time. So this group met, or still meets, every single day with input from councillors once a week. And through this group, we've been able to implement food support programs for the over 65s with AGK, and also a support offer for the under 65s, which is needs based and referral based, but with a very light touch. So I think it's been, again, very responsive, and whoever's come through those referral systems, we have usually been able to respond to within a matter of a few hours. And again, I would say the voluntary sector has really supported both of those offers through volunteers, DBS checks, you know, a lot of advice. And also it's really helped us with the hub, which was established quite soon after lockdown happened. And the hub was really a central place where any resident could call and get advice and help and support through our various offers. And within that, we brought together 43 community organisations, which we were able to signpost residents to, depending on what their particular needs were. So the other thing that the Community Resilience Group has been able to do is bring together a network of really hundreds of residents. So through the Faith Group, which is a subcommittee, and the Neighbourly Group, which is mutual aid, really getting insights from the ground. And, you know, more recently, initiative run by the council is the Network for Residents Associations. So we've had our first meeting, and I think, you know, there was a lot of interest, and a lot of RAs attended that, and we will be learning from that first session and improving it. And it's a session that we're going to be running every single month. So the other thing I think that is worth speaking about is, you know, how the council itself responded. And really, there were many staff redeployed to help with the COVID-19 response. So I think somewhere in the order of 120 redeployed staff to the hub, but also from the Curve, which obviously, you know, shut along with all our other community centres and voluntary organisations. All of these centres were shut. So the Curve actually was redeployed to our food bank network support, and, you know, many of the workers from the Curve were redeployed to other parts of the council. And happily now the Curve is reopening slowly, but it is open, and, you know, we are returning to a new normal, which is good to see. And I would say that you know, now that the immediate crisis is well, seems to be you know, improving, we're thinking very much about what's going to be happening over the next 3 to 6 months. So some of those more normal engagement forums, the listening forum, will be restarting in September. I think as we come out of crisis into recovery, obviously our work must be community-led and will be community-led. We will be restarting with the Grenfell Assemblies in September, which links into the next paper that we have. So I'll probably talk about it more then. And one of the first pieces of work that we're doing to help with that planning is the sentiment survey, which has gone live. You know, this is really the start of a process of understanding how our residents' priorities have changed, given everything that we've gone through in the last few months. So that's a piece of work that really is starting now. But I mean, I think, you know, the paper sort of sets out all of the key pieces of work that we've done, and I really do welcome any questions from you and from your committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor, and the lead member for communities for that, for the report, and of course for your presentation. If I just quickly start with the questions. I know we have gone through a lot for the last 3 years. Of course, we had the Grenfell issue, as well as, not to mention, the coronavirus that actually forced us now not to meet still face to face at the council. And I have been attending, like you are, for the last 3 months almost, at the Community Resilience Group meetings. We do not want to see a council leadership or the council to get in touch only the communities and voluntary sector only when there is a disaster. We want to learn from the past and get to really have a continuous relationship, not just when we need them, but when they also need us to work in terms of funding, in terms of support, in terms of resource sharing. What do you have in mind for the long term with of course, faith communities? And I have been to almost all the food banks, I can say almost all, if not maybe few of them I haven't been to, and community-led churches, and as well as non-profit organizations and charities. What is the long-term plan for a system that is sustainable, that can, if we hopefully we will not have any other disaster, but if we have any difficulties in the future, so we don't have to worry about when we have a good relationship with our own community? Is there something in mind or a strategy that you have or planning to develop now that there will be a long-term relationship, long-term working relationship with the council and local communities, not just when disasters happen?
Well, I think it's absolutely a fair question, and I think given the community resilience group and the subcommittees the subgroups that we have established, I think we really need to continue with those relationships as we kind of come out of the crisis and we lead into recovery. So I don't know the exact answer to your question, but as you would have heard on the last two community resilience groups that you and I both attended, there are plans to work with those partners to continue some of these relationships that we've now built, so that they can be less about crisis and more about recovery and beyond. And I know that they very much want to work like that. We want to work like that. I think we've become a lot closer with our community groups and our voluntary organisations, and all the way through this crisis, and actually before, we've been in really regular touch with them. And I think as we enter a period of time where things are going to be hard, I think more of our residents will have fallen into hardship or have longer term issues coming out of this. And quite honestly, the council will be under increased financial pressure. And our voluntary groups will also be under increased financial pressure. And indeed, they're not able to really operate the way that they were operating before. So I think working together, partnership, bringing together, all of the partners that we've created and developing that is going to be key to how we move forward. I don't know exactly how we do it, and that approach has to be worked with, everybody that's on the resilience groups and the subgroups, but I know that we must continue that work.
Thanks for that. I think I will, I have a few other questions, but it's only fair with the time to let other councillors have questions. So I will go to Councillor Mo Bakhtiar.
Good evening, Anne. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your contribution. I have been talking about the campaign or reaching out issue in the past few years. And I think in the council and most organizations, they are copying or applying a system of negative campaign of reaching out for people. We only reach out for established organizations, established groups, established residents associations, or known individuals to the council or to the committees. We need to reverse this. We have many talents within our communities, within our residents. To do that, I suggest you to identify a few residents in each ward and task them to do this. I could help you with this because this is a better way. We had an issue a few weeks ago in my ward of St. Helens, and we had tens of local residents came out. They were interested in a specific issue of planning, and now they have formed a new group because they felt that they had been left out. Nobody was there were other organizations in place, but they felt they had been left out. So we need to reach out for those who are willing to give their time and lending us their brain to use to tackle our issues in most difficult times we are going through.
Thank you. Anne, please.
So hi Mo, and thank you for your comment. I mean, I'm not sure it's a question so much as a comment, and I agree with you. I think, we must always strive to reach those that are hard to reach, that don't feel included in the conversation. And I think, as we're trying new ways of engaging with our residents, co-design in several areas now, working with our residents on the ground is going to be, more and more important. So, I mean, I think I'm not sure it was a particular question, but I think the comment is absolutely spot on. We must try to reach everybody and work with them and give our residents a role in defining some of these things.
I think although yes, it was a good comment, as well as there was a question in the comment, and I think the question was, what do you have in mind in terms of a strategy for inclusion for the local people to take part the council activities and to take part and to make decisions that affects them. So it was about mainly inclusion rather than just the comments. I think he was referring to that.
I wonder whether I might refer this to our Director for Communities to talk about inclusion. And we are in the middle of defining our community engagement strategy. So I think, if I can call on Tunde to make a comment on Mo's question, that would be great.
But I do understand Tunde will be fantastic to make this comment, but you're the lead member and you're the one who sets the policy. Tunde only implemented policies that you setting. So I think it would be good to hear from the lead member rather than.
Okay, well, I mean, Kasim, I've said that it's important that we reach all of our communities and we work with them. So that is absolutely what I believe, and I completely agree with what Mo has said. I think, as you rightly say, it's Tunde's role and his task to implement that. So I think it would be useful to hear from him on how he intends to implement that.
Okay, I think that would be good. And when the time is right, we may actually call for Tunde to answer that question. But you have answered already, and the policy that you have given the officers and that implementation will reach us in time. Mo, I think that is
yes.
the question.
Yeah, what I want to reiterate. Okay. I would like to clarify that it was a question, but it was a comment, and my observation. This is I developed this in the past 3-4 years, so this is a conclusion, and I offered my help because it is my observation. I am better than anyone else in explaining the new approach and help you how to implement it. So I'm all yours whenever you need me.
Thank you, Councillor Mo. I think you've answered the question, and I think if there's any further details, the comment of Mo has just made that's all done. So moving to Councillor Greg Hammond, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I've got a best case, worst case question for you, if I may. I'm starting with the worst case. How confident are you that the services that you've been providing and coordinating could stand up and deliver again in the event of the worst case of a second wave of the pandemic? In fact, a second wave historically could, if it's like the Spanish flu, be worse than the first wave. Obviously, we're hoping that's not going to be what happens, and that, like many other diseases, it dies away after the first wave. So the best case, you've had to pause a number of services during the last few months, and you've hinted about some of the things that you want to restart in the autumn. But can you just expand on what your priorities are for recovering your normal services as we return to normality? So worst case and best case, please.
So I think in terms of the worst case, we continue to work with the CCG and our Community Resilience Group on that partnership, and we are planning for a second phase if that were to happen. So I think we have all the systems in place, and I feel pretty confident that we would hit the ground running through our continued partnership with the voluntary organisations and with the CCG. So I think there will be an enormous strain on our residents if that were to happen, if that worst case were to happen. But I do feel confident that we have at least got a system in place that could respond to it. So that, I think, is the worst case. In terms of the best case, I mean, we are planning and we have started on the reopening of community centres. And I think it's really hard, actually, because, and having spoken to many of them over the last couple of weeks, they feel really quite frustrated that, particularly with some of the groups that are working with, our younger residents, they're not able to really bring together all of those young people that were able to come before because of social distancing. They can't have everybody come, and that's a really deep concern for them. So I think, we're really trying to support organisations with supporting as many of their of their residents as we possibly can. I think it's really hard, and it will continue to be really hard. But we have every week things are opening up, moving, and I think by September, in terms of the community engagement, we're very much hoping that will return to something that looks normal or pre-pandemic, if you like. So yeah, I think we have both of those work streams in place, and something in the middle, which could be a local outbreak, God forbid, or something which is within one centre or one school. So I think all of those plans are in place and developing.
Thanks very much.
Kasim, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Now back. I think Dori is Councillor Dori Schmetterling is the councillor asking the question. Dori, it's your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Siren. Comprehensive report. Don't have any major questions, but I've got several smaller ones. Is it okay if I put them out all together, and I'll then answer them as all together? Some of them, it's all quite brief. Did I understand? So question one is, did I understand correctly the curve is now reopening? Two. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Well, that's one done. Because he does say mid-July somewhere in there. The second one is, could you perhaps elaborate a little bit specifically on the type of groups under 2.6? You mentioned some faith groups, new neighbourly group for organisations and so on. So the request is if you just mention a few, just to give an example, the sort of thing. In 2.12, you say the second element will focus on more discursive engagement. What do you mean by discursive? And in 2.16, you're speaking of a restructuring of staffing at the curve. Now, I may know already what it is, but as I'm not sure, could you just elaborate a little bit on that and why that is? Because it talks about improvement. If that's to do with the repurposing of the centre, perhaps. And finally, you talk about the review of corporate grants program. I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on the types of recipients of these grants. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you might need to prompt me, Dori, because that was a lot of questions. I'm sorry, I should have written them down from the beginning, but let me see if I can remember everything else.
Okay.
So the curve, yes, the curve has reopened. Obviously, it's not at full capacity.
Sure.
So, they're working really hard on providing the services that they can provide safely. Also, the other thing, actually, I should have mentioned is that staff at the curve have been reaching out to their service users throughout this whole period, so have been in touch with them. So if you wanted an exact report on exactly what's open, what's not open, what's gone online, I can get that to you. But I think really,
no, it's just a case of if it's open, if it's starting to open.
The doors
That's all I
open.
wanted to know. It's just starting to open. That's fine.
The ones that are safe, are operating, and we will continue to open the ones that we can as time moves on. Your second question was about the subgroups. So
faith group networks, yes. Community engagement servicing at 3 specific engagement groups, and then you spoke about engaging with faith groups. Yes, you call them subgroups? Yes, okay. Neighbourly group, organisation, individuals who are supporting, coordinating. Just an idea of what kind of groups they are, who they are, the names of them.
So the faith groups are, faith groups within the borough. So, Albanar, the Methodist Church is there. It's a group that meets once a week. Again, I can get you a full list of everybody who's on that call. The neighbourly group is really made up of predominantly mutual aid and some representation from next door. And the intent of this is, there are the I believe it's the admins from each of the 7 zones in mutual aid attend this group. It's led by Michael Ash, and really the reason to have it is to collect feedback and issues from the ground that these groups are picking up? Because as you know, that network is now made up of about 1,200 local residents across the 7 mutual aid areas. The RA group is a council-led initiative. It's not falling under the Community Resilience Group. I think your next question, remind me, Dory.
Okay,
I think
the restructuring of the staffing at the Curve, the sort of the purpose
so
or the background to it.
Okay, so the background to this is there was a consultation that was done towards the end of last year on feedback on the services and generally the way that the Curve is operating. And the findings of that consultation were published in a key decision, which I think was at the beginning of this year, with a whole bunch of recommendations. And actually, the recommendations were going to be implemented around about the time that COVID struck. So, of course, because it did involve some staff restructure, that was all put on hold. And that work will be restarted in September. I mean, we'll be bringing this up again when we get to the Grenfell update, so we can talk about the real detail of it. But that's what that piece of work is.
I remember that. Thank you. Could I just, the last one was the kind of example of recipients of the corporate grants.
So corporate grants is a scheme that we run at the council. We basically provide core funding to 29 voluntary organisations across the borough. It has been rolled over it was a 3-year contract that was then rolled over again. And really the time had come for us to review that corporate grants and the money that was being distributed. So that process was actually started again towards the end of last year, but put on hold. We were just getting into the early stage interviews with the recipients of the corporate grants and residents who use those services. And all of that work came to a halt really because of COVID. We couldn't do face-to-face interviews. And in any case, many of those staff got redeployed. So again, it will be something that we would restart again in September.
That's right. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I do not see any other committee member asking questions. So I will open to the 1 or 2 questions from other councillors attending the meeting, if there are any who want to ask questions. No, I can't see. So the last question for Councillor Ansaran will go to Abbas, who wants to know about the cost of the Curve and the budget. So Abbas.
Hi. Yes. Constantly, this money, I think sometimes it gets misused. Can you make sure, when the Curve wasn't in use for the residents' recovery and it was repurposed, for the council distribute food, so the rent or other stuff doesn't come out of the same pot? It should be different pot, I assume.
Okay. Well, no, thank you for that, Abbas. I think it's a really good question. I mean, to be completely frank with you, I don't know the exact financial, how the Curve over the last 4 months has been dealt with within our budget. So I will have to go and find out. But I think it's a fair point. And, can I just ask that I speak with the officers and come back to you about that point?
Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to finish off, one final question. I know the grants have been given in terms of the £600,000 for supporting local people in Nottingdale area and the Grenfell recovery. The money that has been spent or the grants that have been awarded just before COVID-19, I'm aware of this. There are some organizations who were not able to fulfill what they have said they're going to do because of the COVID. Is there any plan for that? Or will they feel that because they could not do what they're supposed to do, what will happen to those organizations?
So I guess you're really speaking about commission services rather than...
Not necessarily commission service. If I give you an example, there were organizations who will be given a grant for swimming lessons for communities who want to, use the swimming pool at Kensington Leisure Centre or train local people. They could not do the swimming centre. The swimming, the Kensington Leisure Centre has been closed. It will be opening in 5 days now. What will happen to those, and what is going to happen the grants that have been given? What would be the case for that?
Are you talking about Grenfell projects
Yes,
fund?
the Grenfell Project Fund, yes.
So, I mean, we will talk about this in the Grenfell piece, and we can give a very detailed update on all of the projects that were awarded. Some of those have now moved online. I mean, obviously, in the case of swimming lessons and some of the more, the activities that require face-to-face, they're not, we're going to continue to support them, and we'll work with them to make sure that they deliver their services and their project when they can. So, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be, having their grants taken away because they can't fulfill what they said they were going to do.
Okay.
We've got to support them to get that work done.
That's fine. Thank you very much for answering. And I think I do appreciate for taking the time. And this will not be the last time on our committee. So we will be getting in touch with you for the next meeting. And on that note, we are moving on to the next item on the agenda, A7. That's Grenfell updates. The lead members for Grenfell updates or any directors, I would like to start with the lead member, Kim Taylor-Smith.
Hello, are you receiving me?
We are indeed. We are.
Good, excellent. Okay,
yes.
thank you. So, on page 13, we're just a quick update in terms of housing is concerned. I think it's important, to remember where we started from. We had a grand total of 151 homes that we had households that we had to rehouse, 17 of which were leaseholders, and all but one of the 17 leaseholders has now been compensated and settled. And of the 134 social homes, obviously we very much were committed to ensuring that everybody had a good home. And to date, 194 have moved into their. Hello. So I'm just getting somebody.
Can we ask others to mute themselves, please, and only speak, unmute themselves when they are addressing the committee, please. If not, please mute yourselves. Thank you.
Okay, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, we are.
Good. Okay, so to continue on, 194 households have moved. So we have 7 people who are all in PRS that, which include 3 who are yet to select a home. And obviously, I mean, what we're doing is every person is very much on a different journey. And we said that it was very important to move at the pace of individuals and not set artificial deadlines or make people move into properties that we're not comfortable with, as obviously this could have very much long-term implications on their well-being. On the wider Grenfell housing, out of the original 129 households that went into hotels on as a result of loss of services, 19 of those are now left who are remaining in PRS. 16 of those want to have a new home, and 11 of those 16 require 3 beds and above, which are in extremely short supply. So that's something we're going to have to work very hard on. I think the issue, and it's incorporated in the cost and it's been picked up by a number of people, is obviously the cost of this temporary accommodation, because this is coming from the Grenfell recovery budget. And on a weekly basis, it's working out at about £420,000 a year. Plus, there is also a loss of income to the HRA because we have 7 of those 19 households who have yet to relinquish their home on the Lancaster West estate. And that's obviously very important in terms of being available for local lettings policy and new residents. And that's going to cost the HRA in the region of about £75,000 a year. And that's something which we're obviously having to look at. I think we have put in place a dedicated housing management team who are there, obviously, who are taking a very resident focus in terms of safety and repairs. Thanks to the staff during lockdown, I mean, we've been able to maintain that service. We did see a small number of people experiencing financial hardship during lockdown, and they've been supported through the council's hardship fund. But I'm pleased, as I say, and credit to Doug and his team, that the average turnaround of repairs has been 4 days or below, and at the moment we're getting 100% of residents which are satisfied with the service that we're giving. So, I mean, we obviously have to continue to work very hard, support our residents in terms of getting the remaining households rehoused. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you?
Very happy to take questions.
Many thanks indeed. I do appreciate that. And yes, the floor is open to, yes, I will start with Councillor Freeman, Robert Freeman, please. Take your time. Councillor Freeman, Robert Freeman, it's your...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was just unmuting myself.
All right, take your time. Thank you.
I thought it was really very interesting, but I just wondered, are there too many things that we are doing? Because there is such a long list. I wonder if it wouldn't do better to concentrate on fewer activities and to try and put more money into each one of them.
So are we talking about the next paper, Councillor Freeman? At the moment, I'm just giving an update on Grenfell. Page paper A7.
Yeah, so am I. 415.
Yes.
The Digital Community Leadership Programme launched on 17th of June includes the following programme.
Okay. Can I just stop you and just to say I think there was a mistake in the agenda because I actually the Community Leadership Programme I think is one that Councillor Siren's probably best to cover. Then it doesn't come under me.
Yeah, I did wonder about that. Councillor Siren, do you feel like answering that?
Well, I'm very happy to, but I refer back to the chair. Councillor Ali, do you want me to present my part of the paper, or would you rather Kim answered his bit of the paper and then I talk about my? How would you like to do it?
The floor is open to both of you, and if there are councillors asking questions, I think you can also answer those questions.
Sorry, Councillor Siren, if I could just interject for a moment. It's not only 415, it's also the appendices. There are an enormous number of activities. I just wonder if there aren't too many.
And do you think it might be worthwhile you chipping in and finishing off the presentation, and then we'll take our questions together?
No, I think the chair wants me to answer the question, so okay. I'm kind of to do that.
Sorry, Anne. I think what we can do instead of the reason the housing and communities are put together, they are very interlinked issues, and of course, I think what we can do is Robert Freeman, if you do not mind, we will ask both Anne and others, other officers as well, to finish off their presentation, and then the question and answer will be at the end of this, rather than interrupting questions.
Of course, absolutely fine.
That will do. That's the way we will go from it. So please, Anne, it's the platform is yours, and we ask all other members other officers to contribute, and then question and answer will be the last of this, rather than interrupting with the question and answer. Thank you.
So what would you like me to do? Would you like me to talk through the Grenfell programs, or would you like me to answer the question?
No, talk through Grenfell program, please.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. The part that I have responsibility for within my portfolio is the Grenfell Community Programme. And really, this has three elements to it. It was defined in the recovery strategy. And really, the idea of these programs was that it was there to support community-led recovery, building on the extraordinary community response that we saw immediately after the tragedy. So the first element of the community recovery programme is the Grenfell Projects Fund. Really, this was co-designed with the community. We very much wanted to give responsibility for awarding the money that had been allocated to the community. So a total of 52 projects were awarded funding. And this was done in January and February of this year, just before, thankfully, before COVID hit. Now, obviously, there's been an issue with some of those projects being delivered. But as I mentioned, we're working with all of them to either move their activities online or when it's safe to do so, continue to deliver those activities face to face. So we did a quite extensive participatory budgeting exercise. I mean, it was at the time, well, We heard it was one of the biggest that had ever been undertaken, and we had 2 decision days. And I think, we learned a lot. I mean, I think it was great to see everybody in the community seeing all of the bids that were put forward, the projects, the ideas. It really was an incredible process to be part of. So we've listed in the paper the projects that are able to be delivered online, and some of them are already up and running. And then, of course, we'll work with all of the successful recipients to make sure that they're able to deliver their projects. But I think, it really was quite an innovative way of really getting the community to support their own recovery and decide what they felt was important to them and what would help them. And we were really there to facilitate that process. The next part of the programme is the Community Leadership Programme. And this is all about supporting training and capacity building, amongst our residents and amongst our organisations. Again, there was quite a significant amount of budget put towards this programme. And, to answer your question, Councillor Freeman, I mean, this really is an on the ground, there to support as many residents and organisations as possible. And that's why we've got so many different organisations and so many people that have been touched by this programme. And I think, there's somewhere in the region of 800 residents who have had training and capacity building as part of this programme so far. So one of the things that we're doing now, obviously, there's been 1 year of these programmes delivered, and we're now starting to think about feedback on those programmes and developing a programme for next year against both of those. As part of that, I mentioned the Grenfell Assembly. Hopefully we'll be restarting in September to help us understand, the community's needs and issues that they're facing, particularly now that we've had another emergency. And then the last piece of this is the curve, which is discussed in the paper. And again, we touch on the consultation that has been done that Dory mentioned. So the finding was submitted to the council in February, and that will all be implemented. We'll start to hopefully implement it in September if everything continues to go well. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of our priorities and our work plan for the next few months, obviously it's going to be about getting feedback on the first 2 programmes and adjusting and responding to how those programmes will be prepared for next year, and then continuing to support the curve with its reopening, with its programmes going live, and also recruiting new board members to support the curve's continued work. So that's really an overview, I guess, of the wider community programme that falls within my responsibilities. And yes, very happy to take questions on any of that.
Thank you, Anne. Just double check with you and Kim Taylor-Smith. We have covered the housing and the housing, rehousing and housing service for Grenfell survivors, and also Grenfell Community Programme, Grenfell Project Fund, and Community Leadership, and the Curve, the Community Centre, the last. So just want to go back, if there are any officers who want to contribute before you come, we ask questions. Kim, from your side, is there any officers who wants to contribute, or we'll start questioning?
I will ask the officers if there's any additional things you wish to add, or shall we wait for questions?
I think with time limited, we will move and we will start with the questions now. We had, of course, Councillor Freeman. Are you satisfied with the answer, or you want to follow up question?
I think it's absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Councillor Siren. I appreciate that, and I am happy with the explanation that you gave.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Councillor Greg Hammond, you next, please. Any questions?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. And I'm going back to Kim, if I may. And Kim, in paragraph 2.7 of the paper, talking about the wider Grenfell group, and in your oral evidence, you were talking about the shortage of larger properties, family-sized properties of 3 bedrooms and above. And I understand the normal housing waiting lists for those kind of properties are much longer than for the smaller properties. So, and this does link to later papers, but it's relevant to Grenfell because this is where it comes up. What lessons can you take forward into the New Homes programme from this? For example, would you be thinking that we should be building more larger properties or a higher proportion of larger properties at the expense of absolute numbers when we get to the New Homes programme? I'd be very interested to see your thoughts and extrapolations of this data, please.
Okay, I mean, I think first of all, what are we doing to deal with the current situation? And the answer is we're trying to generate as many 3 and 4 bedroom properties that we can. We've put out a call as far as existing residents are concerned and given incentives to people to downsize. We're offering on the new block at Bowmore Row the opportunity for people to downsize into a new really good quality accommodation in order to encourage people to give release larger homes. We also we have a small capital fund where we're using to buy back ex-council homes, and we're in negotiation to again buy larger properties in order to do that. But in short answer, in terms of looking forward, we within the housing strategy, we are looking at our allocation, and that will be something which will come out to consultation on. And I think it's fair to say that although in terms of numbers, when you analyse what we have on our long list of people who are in temporary accommodation waiting for a new home, the demand is for 1 and 2 bedroom properties, not the smaller properties, but the waiting time that applies to a larger property can be many years because we have very, very few that come up. And as an indication, I think the last 3 bedroom that came up, we had 74 people applying for that home, which shows obviously the acute need for it. So in short answer to your question, yes, I do want to see us building larger homes in order to alleviate the problem that we have with people stuck and not able to move.
Thank you. Councillor Mo Bakhtiar.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Councillor Kim Taylor-Smith. It's in 2.1 mentioned that we still have 7 households in temporary accommodation. I know privately rented accommodation. It must be very costly to rent privately. Can you give us an example why we couldn't house the remaining 7? One example, maybe, or 2.
Okay, well, I think of the 7 that I mentioned earlier, 3 of those households have yet to choose a home. The other 4 have chosen a home, and obviously one of our commitments was to do a lot of bespoke work to ensure this, they're good quality homes for people to move into. And COVID has impacted us doing works on homes, but they've selected their homes, and we'll get the works finished as quickly as we're able in order to support them to move. The other 3 households, it really is a question of identifying a home that they're happy with, that suits their needs, and our housing team are on that. I mean, they obviously have very regular contact in order to try and do that. But they are, I think it's important to stress that they are in good quality private rental accommodation. So the importance is to get people into a space where they can make that decision, because it's clearly a long-term decision that they're going to make for the rest of their life. So it's important that they can do that, and we'll support them in doing it.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Bennett. Tom?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Kim, I was just wondering on the regarding residents on the Lancaster West estate in 2.8, there's that 7 households have indicated they don't wish to return or haven't relinquished their tenancies. I think it obviously goes without saying that it's in everyone's interest and that the households for their sort of future stability and security, and the and potential families who might want to move into there, that we help them make that decision. Do we have a sort of clear target date by which we hope to have helped them make that decision on whether to move back or whether to accept a new property and relinquish their tenancy?
Well, I mean, 3 years have elapsed, and we have given lots of representations to the individuals concerned and to their representatives where they're advised by solicitors, making it very clear that they can release their home and it does not impact at all in terms of them waiting for a new home. I think there is a really understandable fear where you've had people who've seen people on a waiting list for a long time. There is this fear that that if they did relinquish, they would be stuck. And that's something which we're working very hard, and giving assurances to them and the solicitors that that's not going to be the case. But we are going to have to look at this carefully because it is impacting on the ability to use them under the local lettings policy. We are very short of homes. We've got a lot of people looking homes. These homes are really required to come back as soon as possible. And we've got to look at every measure as to how we can do that.
Thank you, Councillor Doris Masling. And this time, only one question for you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do have several because I thought we were scrutinising, but
I'm sorry.
Anyway,
yes, with time, do apologise. With time, I think we had good questions earlier, so this time 1 or 2 max, please, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, in fact, I've got 2 for Councillor Taylor-Smith, and I've got 1 quick one for Councillor Siren, if that's all right.
I think Councillor Siren had served her time. I'm sure she did answer at least good number of questions. So we move on with Councillor Taylor-Smith, if you don't mind, please.
In 2.4, you refer to moves likely to take place later in the year. Under this, the Grenfell Recovery Programme costs. I wonder if you could just elaborate what you meant by that. What is meant by that?
We've identified properties for people to move into. So again, when they're made available, and these are principally to do with the new properties, then obviously we anticipate a move. So we do anticipate that overall cost reducing.
Okay, thank you. The second question was on housing services in 3.1, where it speaks of complex structural repairs and so on. I suppose the general question is what the current state of outstanding repair jobs is, because I remember after Grenfell, when we took over the management from the tenant management organisation, there were thousands of jobs left over, and then the number suddenly plummeted because people got on with the job. So basically, where are we now? I know things have slowed down right this minute, but because of the COVID situation. But in general, how many outstanding and how quickly do they get done?
It's considerably less. I think I've already indicated 4 relate to Grenfell Tower and Grenfell Walk former residents. So we would anticipate those to be done quite quickly. As I say, we have been hampered in terms of doing works with contractors on doing that. So that were 4. As far as the wider Grenfell, I don't think it's that many. I mean, that might be something that one of the officers could give me an exact number on, but it's not the long list that we had when we looked at this a year ago.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dora, as well, for the questions. And I understand we are doing scrutiny and we have to scrutinize the lead members, but with time, of course, they will be available for the next time. So I do appreciate and thank you for taking the time to go through the papers and have many questions. So we do thank you for that. I think since we don't have any other question from the committee members, I will now move to the councillors who are here. I think Councillor Judith Blakeman wanted to ask a question. Just briefly, if I see the chat, I'm not sure. Judith.
No, sorry, I put my question in the chat.
So now that you have on the floor, what do you want to ask a quickly question?
Well, I was worried about the amount of duplication in the projects, the Grenfell projects, and also the fact that I think some of them were submitted just so that they could get the money.
Thank you, Kim.
I think that's one for Anne.
It's me. Thank you, Judith. And this is something that we've talked about, you and I, before. I think, we have to respect the decisions that the community made on the 2 days where we had the decision making. I think, we will be monitoring these projects as they're delivered. And I think we'll see which ones are successful and which ones perhaps less so. There will be quite a light touch with the monitoring because a lot of these organisations are new. And, we don't want to put people off with too much monitoring, but we do need to make sure that the projects are delivered and understand, whether they are successful or not. So there is an officer who is responsible for doing that. And I think, we just need to wait and see how those projects start to be delivered over the coming months. And I think the duplication will itself be dealt with when we come to rerun this fund next year, because I think the community will learn from what they've seen with the first set of project funds.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that. I think I will now move to the last question from David, the Vice Chair for Lancaster West Residents Association. David.
Hiya, can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can. Yeah, it was just to say really, it was one for Kim and one for Anne, so I did put them in the chat. It was to say really for Kim, we just wanted to know, so there's this handy person service for the registered providers, who I presume are housing associations. I just wondered, is that money coming out of the Grenfell Projects funding, or are the housing association providers paying for the handy person? I just wondered how the responsibility for those repairs would be divided. And for Anne, I really wanted, so there's plenty of figures on footfall in the curve and attendance, but how many of those people are local residents? Because I know there is a concern. I spoke to one of the ex-directors of the curve, and he said there was a concern that it isn't being used by a local community, and its location also makes that difficult. So maybe there should be some thought about outreach to the local community, and perhaps with the new regulations on having to take people's addresses and names when they go there, there'll be an opportunity to rebuild the community using that.
Okay, so can I just ask Doug Goldring to answer your question as to where the pot is for the handy person service is coming from? Because I would hate to get it wrong.
Hi everyone, it's Doug Goldring. I'm Director of Housing Management. It is coming from the Grenfell Housing Service. So yes, it's coming from the General Fund.
Thank you.
It's a service for the bereaved and survivors.
Thank you, David. Is that that answers your question, or you have another
question?
Well,
I would have wondered, wouldn't it make more sense for the housing providers to be paying for it, or to be getting housing providers who are providing adequate repair and support services for their members? Because this is certainly an issue with the non-Grenfell survivor houses we have on the estate here that are managed by housing associations.
Okay, so this is an additional extra over and above the normal day-to-day repairs that we feel as an authority is something that we should be providing to those that have lost their homes and are bereaved and survivors from the tragedy.
Thank you. I think that concludes this session. And if we go to the next one, that was a Grenfell. Okay. While we are on the Grenfell updates, of course, the issue of Grenfell is important and close to many people, including myself, as I live in the ward. Although I am a councillor for Delgado ward, I do live in Nottingdale, and it has been affecting many people. So for this session, I have invited Shah, who is one of the bereaved family members. Families in Grenfell, and I want him to come to the floor and not just ask, but give us an update of how, not necessarily what the council has been doing, but also how the bereaved families have been feeling about it, the service that they have been receiving. Are they happy about it? With it? What would they like to be improved? How the things are 3 years on, but I still feel the event just yesterday, because I can still see visually what has happened on the night. And it never goes away. Talking about my personal feelings. And Shah, if you hear, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving this opportunity to speak on behalf of the bereaved families and the victims. We have been trying to kind of get things going into the right direction. through the scrutiny, through the steering group. And some things have been, we had some progress on some areas, but I'm afraid, there is a lot of work still needs to be done. For example, some of the issues that you were covering, these Grenfell projects grants, quite a large number of bereaved families and victims are not even aware of existence of such, facilities and help that has been available. Since we have taken since we have participated at the steering group, the amount of work that we've done and the work that we've actually voted to get progress on have been, welcomed with a lot of enthusiasm, especially the educational part that is being carried out. We have asked for the RBKC Educational Fund to chip in towards that, because the funds currently is being provided through our pot, which is supposed to be for the recovery of the whole. But please allow us to participate in a meeting so we can see where the money is being spent, which groups are being given the funds, are the work they're doing, what difference is it going to make? Is it value for money? How many people are participating? Is quite a lot of things that I wanted to say was said by your first speaker, Dr. Saffron Woodcroft. So please, let's have a meeting so we can, sit down together with other bereaved families and victims to see where the money is going, where the fund is being spent, and what is the outcome of the money that was already being spent. And who's deciding on what projects to spend money on and what not to spend it on. I brought up an example. Last year, there was a bereaved family who actually went to buy a second-hand uniform for their kids because they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford a brand new uniform. And yet, when I see that money is being wasted on projects that is, quite a lot of them, I don't even know of its existence. And then when I hear it, I say, what is waste of money? Who is deciding on these projects? Please, let's have a meeting soon, hopefully, to see, how the money is being spent. This money is for the recovery of the victims. The education money, especially the education money, last year, I think it was £1.2 million that has been spent on the name of Grenfell, which we didn't see any of it. This year, the education program that we are initiating, we have to it has to come out of our budgets. The £800,000 that we are responsible for is coming out of that. So we are asking the education section of the RBKC to chip into that. And as for Grenfell projects grants, so can we actually have some sort of funds made available for some organization that is going to represent the bereaved and the victims? Because currently, if you ask any bereaved families, where would you go for help? They wouldn't have any idea where to turn to, except for their key workers, and the key workers quite often don't do the work. They say oh, this is not available, that is not in the policy, no, you can't do it. It seems that they are the ones that are have been hit with the huge amount of problem to begin with, and now on the recovery they are forgotten. nobody talks on their behalf. I quite often attend meetings, and everybody is, who are attending seems to be kind of fighting for their own agenda, and these people are forgotten. I've spoken with Callum earlier on, and I hope that we have a constructive relationship, work relationship, to actually put things right, start a recovery program that befits the problem. I mean, for you guys, you just heard about Grenfell, and we live it. I mean, every day we can't forget it. It's our lives, and the recovery hasn't even begun for us. And all these projects you're talking about, I don't know what I don't know what to say. I think it's waste of money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shah. Thank you very much for, of course, taking the time, and as a resident of Notting Dale, and of course, I'm sure other councillors and everyone else who is here and listening, and maybe will be listening, shares your frustration, and hopefully we can't get back our lost family members, but what we can do, we should get right from now onwards the process. And I think what I have understood from your question, from your comment and your speech or your talk is the system created for bureaucracy, or the system created to serve and to help to recover for the recovery of the survivors? And I think that question will be putting to the lead members. The relevant lead members will answer. If Grenfell, bereaved family members are feeling this, what the system is there for. So
the where the resources are being spent on is there's a big question mark over it, and this there's quite a large amount of management, and quite a large amount of the funds made available is going towards the management of the system that has been created. Okay. And then when you actually see where how much of funds actually reach the receiver, the victims, it's not much. I mean,
thank you very much. I think we will leave it there for your point. I think it's about time for the lead members to answer a specific question. What is the system for? Is it for the bereaved family and survivors, or is for the management and bureaucracy? Thank you. And
thank you.
Welcome to the floor, Anne Salmon, please.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Thank you for all your comments, and I can't even imagine how incredibly difficult it is for you. I think the piece that we've talked about tonight at this scrutiny committee is the wider community, the wider Grenfell community. That is the piece that I'm responsible for. It is one piece of many. A much wider Grenfell recovery, which I don't have responsibility for, and I think was discussed at the OSC. And I believe, I've seen that the budgets and the monies that have been allocated across the bereaved, the survivors, the dedicated service, and the wider community are all on the website. So I don't want to avoid your question and not answer it, but it's not within my responsibility. I think on the wider community piece, we wanted it to be community-led. I think it's not perfect. I think it's very different from anything that we've done before. It really, was the community deciding how they wanted this money to be spent. And again, there's no perfect mechanism for doing that. I think we've made a good start. Do I think we can do better? Yes, for sure. Do I think we can learn from how that money's been spent? Yes, I do. But that money was for the wider Grenfell community, people living around the tower. It wasn't specifically for the bereaved and the survivors, although of course the project fund was open to the bereaved and the survivors. And I'm really sorry to hear that you didn't know about it, because we worked really hard to try and communicate with everybody in the area, and everybody we tried to let everybody know that this is what we were doing. So I'm sorry that you didn't know about it. So I don't know. I mean, I wonder, Kim, whether you might want to sort of come in and comment on this. I think it's quite complex because there are lots of different parts of the budget, not all of which we're here to talk about tonight. But Kim, do you want to say a few words on this?
No, not really in terms of detail, other than just to say thank you, Shah. It's good to see you, and thank you for coming in and talking about this. I mean, I think it is something that we can take back. Again, like you, it's going to sound like I'm dodging the question because it doesn't come under my remit, but it is obviously in terms of ensuring that there is transparency, so that people can understand what the money is being spent on. I think that's incredibly important, and I think we can do that. There is information on the website, but maybe there's not enough information on that. I mean, I'm not aware that any money is being spent on management. I know that we do fund people to do jobs of work of support. But I say, I'm afraid I don't feel qualified that I can actually comment in detail on the points that you have raised, but we can take it back.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of, I think the issue.
Thank you, Shah.
Thank you.
In terms of the issue of how complex it is and how difficult it is for one lead member to understand, or one lead member to give a question or to answer the multiple questions that Shah and maybe others have. Shall we say we should have a follow-up meeting maybe at the next scrutiny committee, and to see if what has been done, and Shah could perhaps give us a written questions and to be answered to the relevant lead members.
I think, Chair, I mean, we have to be careful here with scrutiny, because obviously we are here to scrutinise. I'm here to scrutinise my portfolio, as is Anne here to scrutinise. I think, as Anne has made up, there's certain questions that are being raised that relate to other scrutiny committees. So maybe the issue, I think, may be better dealt with by you writing to that scrutiny committee saying that this has been raised up. But I think we've got to be careful not to blur the borders here.
No, thank you. Exactly, that's what I have said earlier. I think if you give us as a written questions, then that's the questions
we
that
can
are
pass
relevant
them on.
to you, that are relevant to you, both of you can answer, and those who are not relevant to you, then we can pass on to the relevant teams. But this, the reason I say we have this section for Grenfell scrutiny, the Housing and Community Scrutiny Committee, is to give Grenfell survivors and bereaved families a chance. We will have a meeting. Each meeting that we will hold, as long as I'm the chair, they will be attending and asking questions. And to finish off with this subject, we also had long questions, about 8 long questions, a long email from Grenfell Next of Kin. I do apologize. We cannot give the platform to them simply because their email reached us 30 minutes before the time of the meeting. So we will also provide a written question answers to them from the relevant teams, and that will come along with the minutes of this meeting, along with Shah's answers. So if I can move on from that with this topic, I'm cautious about the time, and I know it's supposed to be finishing, but we have 20 minutes to go through another item, and I hope this meeting will not last longer than 9 o'clock. And I think after 9 we'll be finishing off. So if I move on to another item of this, will be item number 8. That will be the housing strategy action plan highlights, and also updates from the new homes delivery. These two can be summarized by maybe one person or two if necessary. But
no, that's all under my remit, Kasim.
I was thinking if you want to call officers, that's what I was in mind, but I know it's...
Well, I think it's a shame that we're running out of time, because I think paper A8 for me is probably one of the most important papers that we're discussing today. I'll keep a very brief introduction. I wanted to go through the paper in some detail, but recognizing, and respecting the fact you want to keep a bit of pace on this, because, I mean, this is... I don't think it comes up very well. I mean, in the picture, our housing strategy action plan has been put onto the website, and it was incredibly important for us to be very transparent on this. What's on the website will be updated. We've given an undertaking that we come back to the scrutiny committee and talk about progress. And you'll see from the strategy plan that's on the website, they all have dates where things that need to be done by. And I mean, in total, we've got over 48 actions and 112 milestones, which we are talking about and reporting on, so we can be held to account. I think I was going to go through some of those milestones, but I'm respecting the fact that you want to put a bit of pace on this. I think it's fair to say that we're making good progress on all of these actions, but we have had the impact of COVID, which has impacted on some of the things that we're doing. But I think I'd like to start by just saying a huge thank you to the staff who's worked really hard during the COVID in order to deal with these actions. And what we've also had is we've had other issues being added to us. I mean, the government has given us requirements on rehousing rough sleepers. We've reacted to that very quickly, and we've scaled up our rough sleeping service. And obviously that's something which is impacting on this. We've been obviously within COVID, we've been doing a large number of welfare calls to residents who are within our social housing and TA housing throughout London. And that's a feature which we're looking at as how we might continue that on, because it's been very well received. We've obviously given a lot of flexibility to rent payments and giving people support from our £500,000 hardship fund, which we're doing. And our housing management team have been continuing to do urgent works, obviously respecting lockdown and ensuring the safety as far as our residents is concerned. There are 5 priorities which I think are set out in 2.3 about supporting the Grenfell survivors. And there again, I think I'm just going to highlight quickly the work that we've been doing on our fire safety, understandably in our accreditation of SP205. And not only were the first authority to get this certification, but it's also enabled us to join the Fire Industry Association Resident Safety Panel. And there's a big program now of education for people on that. So I think that's a very important milestone to just highlight. In terms of increasing our affordable housing, which again is a commitment, the first 97 homes are going to the planning committee tomorrow. 74% of those are going to be affordable because we're using this program approach in terms of pricing. We're also very much pushing our developers. We want to see mixed tenure schemes within our own developments as well as third parties. And the one site, the Tesco site on the Cromwell Road, which was approved, I think eventually ratified in June, that's going to deliver 186 new affordable homes, which is more than our annual target. And obviously we're looking at Earls Court and Canalside, Kensal Canalside, again to do that. That's where a lot of our homes will come from. I think I just want to mention the key worker scheme. We're doing a pilot, which we'll announce very shortly, where we're going to do a small number of key worker schemes to learn from that. It will be followed up with a more detailed conversation with our residents in order to shape a proper scheme, which again is on our strategy that's coming forward. But that big gap in the middle between social housing and our really expensive private housing is a big area that we need to obviously fill and address. And that's something we've got very much from our residents. I think the other aspect of resident-centred services, and this was a point that was made by Saffron, it really resonates with me. It is very important that we have our residents in the heart of everything we do. And Doug could wax on lyrical all about the various task and finish groups and the things that we're doing on that. But I think it's a very important part of what we're going to be doing. I touched on allocations as well. That's something which will come up shortly. And then I'm just finishing off because I can see you're looking at me impatiently. Again, we've got improving the quality of our property. We're into our capital program now. It's disappointing it's taking as long, but that's a reflection again of the work we're doing with residents, and we're going to be starting doing some works on that fairly shortly. So I think really to sort of finish off very quickly, I think that we've done an awful lot in this. Do I wish that we could have done everything to plan? Yes, absolutely. In the time frame, I wish we had. I can't underestimate the impact that COVID has played on this, not only just in terms of achieving these targets, but also the impact it's going to have on our funding. And it's going to be very much something we're going to have to work very hard to steer the council through. And I hope, again, the committee would join me in just thanking the officers for the great work that they're doing. End of story.
Thank you. Of course, we thank the officers and the committee and everyone else who has contributed to this meeting. Yes, you've pointed, I'm waiting impatiently, but I think this is the first meeting that has been done for the last 8 months. So if we scrutiny committee did its magic and did its work and its duties, I think we would not have a long agenda like we have today. So 8 months in one evening, it's not that easy. But in the meantime, I'll crack on with members. Councillor Greg Hammond, please. And one question, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Chair. And as with all the others, I will ask one question. Kim, on paragraph 4.19 and onwards, we're on to a very good section on rough sleepers, and I mean the whole paper is a very good and very useful one. Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's drafted it. We had an announcement from the government a couple of months ago about £433 million to try and make some real progress on the issue of addressing rough sleepers, and we had another announcement of £105 million at the end of June. Obviously, that's nationwide. So I'm wondering if we have an allocation at borough level of these monies, and how are we doing in terms of addressing the problem at local level?
Again, I think I'll give you some highlight numbers, and I'd ask, I think Dan Hawthorne's in on as an officer, and he maybe give you a little bit more detail on that. I mean, suffice to say, as it says in the report, we were mandated, to provide safe accommodation for our rough sleepers and people in hospitals, and we saw over 153, of which 66. People were put into temporary accommodation, and now obviously we're going through those 66 people in order to find them. It was an emergency accommodation in hotels, and now we're working with them in order to find more suitable housing. Suffices to say that the monies that we're receiving in terms of support from the government, aren't going to cover the cost of what we're doing on that, and we're obviously, but we're waiting for additional detail on that at the moment. So it is an incredibly difficult thing. I think if you go back to our housing strategy, what we're trying to do now, and this is not specifically about rough sleeping, is have a whole look at our homelessness. And the important thing for us is to stop it before it happens, and to provide advice and support, work with other agencies in order to keep people in their homes rather than them being homeless and going into other accommodation. I just want to give Dan, if you're there, if you might like to add in terms of funding in future.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, I'm Dan Hawthorne, the Executive Director for Housing and Social Investment. I'm afraid, actually, I don't have a great deal of detail to add to what Councillor Taylor-Smith has said. We can pull together a more detailed response on that specific point of the government funding. I think I'm right in saying that as things currently stand, we're trying to piece together the picture, because as you say, the announcements of the money have come in drips, and if I understand it right, some of that is money that we bid for, others is money where we're simply given our share as an allocation. What we do know as well is that we'll be able to use that funding for some members of that cohort. There'll be others with no recourse to public funds that even with extra money, we'll really struggle to help in the same way, because the Housing Act prevents us from being able to help those people in the same way. But what I'll do is I'll pull together a note which summarises in more detail where we are with that government money and circulate it to members of the Select Committee.
I mean, that would be very helpful, Dan. Thank you very much. I mean, from my point of view, and this is really for the chair, I'd be happy to see that in the briefing notes in the papers for the October meeting, if it helps, and then it becomes a document that's available for the public, and it gives you a bit more time to do it, because this is a long-term issue. Chair, do you think that's a good plan? You're muted, Kasim.
Thank you. I'll just mute myself. I think you've just mentioned a very good point, and the reason that I have actually, the way that I put together the agenda, there are some live issues that will be going on the next few months, and there are issues that we have to address. So specifically to answer your question, yes, this one and the homelessness, as well as housing, the fire safety, will be coming back to our scrutiny committee, if not once, but maybe twice. So the next meeting. So this will be a long term for us. So if we don't cover today, well, some of them will be an update as well. So we will be calling the lead member, the relevant lead members for ongoing issues like the homelessness, the housing, and fire safety. So thank you. Yes. Tom Pennant, please. Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, Kim, thank you. Also have my thanks for very ambitious and proactive and interesting paper. And thanks to the officers. I just wanted to zoom in on the key worker housing element. And obviously, I mean, we've got a lot of key workers in the borough, and we're never going to be able to provide key worker housing for all of them, or indeed the majority of them. So I'm wondering about how we go about selecting them, and if we selecting who gets that housing, and if we consider an element of added value. I mean, for example, a caretaker or a park warden living on site or right next to the site, I can see significant amount of added value in that. And the classic would be a lighthouse keeper, but I don't think we have any of those. So I was wondering if we look at that added value. And then secondly, if that key worker then gets offered a job outside the borough, no longer as a key worker, do we have a mechanism in place to get those houses back?
Yes, I mean, I think, first of all, as I say, we're doing a pilot scheme. It's only going to be 14 homes in a specific block, and we're targeting what I think we're referring to as homes for local heroes. So we're looking at NHS and schools in the immediate area. We've put together an outline scheme purely on those 14 homes, but I think it's important to stress that this is a pilot, and we really do need to have some consultation to answer those really difficult questions in terms of, who actually qualifies to be a key worker. What happens if they lose their job? How do you select them, etc., etc. But that's something which I say we've very much got to listen to and hear from our residents. But I think it's important for us to just dip our toe in the water with these 14 and deal with it in terms of and highlight and address some of those issues on a very much a small scale, and we will be giving details on that shortly.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just Councillor Doris Smashlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yes, thank you very much to Councillor Taylor-Smith and the officers for a comprehensive report, but I know there's an ambitious programme going on. My question relates to, I guess, 420 in the paper on rough sleepers. What interests me is that given that the borough has always tried to get all the rough sleepers we find on the streets off the streets, what has changed that in reality, what has changed? It appears to have made it possible to get just about everybody off the street. I know government has put some money in, but I thought we always tried to get them off anyway. And the reason people were on the street were because they, let's say, chose to be there.
Well, I think again, the numbers are. I believe from our rough sleeping outreach team that we have effectively 22, known rough sleepers that we've had within the borough, and they are consistently seen and visited, and they prefer to stay where they are and not take accommodation. When coronavirus, obviously we had the mandate as far as the government was concerned. I think, as I said in the numbers, we had 153 people present themselves. And we also had to deal with people who were in our hostels where they were using shared facilities, because they clearly had to be putting into isolated accommodation, and that's where the hotels come in. So we have ended up, with a net 66 additional people that we're going to have to work our way through. And I think, a lot we were seeing people coming from other boroughs coming into RBKC. So, we've obviously had to just accommodate them on an immediate need. And when we process through those and actually look at them, then it will be a question of seeing what housing entitlement they would have in RBKC, whether or not they should go back to another borough, etc. So we'll just have to work our way through it. But we obviously have seen an increase of numbers because of COVID.
Thank you. Have we learned something for the post-COVID-19 period in terms of accommodating them, do you think?
I don't think so, because obviously the accommodation we did is we took contracts on 2 hotels, one in borough and one out of borough. So it was a short-term fix. So I think, the solution, is the same solution for our 2,300 people on our TA list. It's providing more accommodation, more suitable accommodation, which we'll work on.
Thank you.
Thank you both. In terms of the homelessness, if I were to say, we know the figures from homelessness. We have the second highest TA out of borough. What would be the costs if we were to have them in the borough? What would be the costs between?
Goodness me.
Just to compare the cost.
That was something I'd have to come back and answer. I mean, suffices to say that of our TA accommodation, only 25% of it is in borough. So you've got another 25 in surrounding boroughs nearby, and then you've got 50%, throughout London. And I've got a feeling, I think the net, if you take into account the gross rental cost to us, it's about 40 million. The net cost, when you obviously take back support we receive back from the government, it's costing about 10 million. So it would be I would have to come back and ask somebody to calculate it, because I wouldn't want to sort of stick my finger up in the air. Suffices to say it would be a large number.
Okay. What about if someone from the residents, you've mentioned the key workers, and most of the key workers we know, the school teachers, as well as nurses and doctors and the police. What would you say if someone asks you, or someone says to you, does he have to take to the loss of 65,000 British citizens and almost 45,000 of confirmed COVID-19 death related to actually the council, RBAC, the wealthiest in the country, to think about accommodating key workers? What would you answer to that? Why is it taking us that long to actually think about that? We need key workers in our borough to support our residents. Why has been this delayed?
Well, there has been historically a key worker scheme, and it wasn't very well used. So I really can't talk. I mean, there are some councillors on this call that would have been here and could answer that questions. What I can say from our residents is that middle gap that we've got between our social rent and our expensive rent is a very important point that everybody says that we need to provide accommodation from. I think more importantly for me personally, is that it also supports mixed tenure housing schemes. We do not want to have large blocks of expensive housing or large blocks of socially rented housing. We'd want to mix it up. It very much improves people's life chances, etc., in order to do it. So I think it's an important component in order to do it. The other thing I'll just correct you on, because you keep saying it, Kasim, is we're not the richest borough in the country. And I think you need to have a look at our finance and our budget and our reserve to realise that we are not the richest borough, actually, let alone Europe. What we are, though, is we have the most expensive housing in the country. That I think we very much acknowledge. I mean, 1.3 million average price for a house is ridiculous. And we also have the highest differential between average income, top and bottom as well. So, that presents tremendous challenges to us. But we're going to do everything we can in order to improve our housing within feasibly to do within housing.
Thank you. Regions comes sometimes the debt of if we are 20 million down and other boroughs are 100 million down, we are richer than them. So it's sometimes how you look at it. But
I think if you look at reserves, at your reserves, Kasim. That's how you judge. That's how you judge the wealth of a borough.
I will look at it for another day, that we can look into the post-COVID and Grenfell and where we were before and what we are doing currently. So if I move on to another questions now, the floor will be open to other councillors who are attending the meeting rather than the committee members. Anyone else have a question for the housing and so far I can't see any other commission and any other question. So if I finish with my last question in terms of the key workers, you've said you're looking into 14 properties as a pilot project. Do you have in mind for the new homes to be built, the 600 we've talked about earlier, or you've mentioned that some of them, at least 25% of them, will be allocated for the key workers after this pilot?
Short answer, yes.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a really important component. We've got to have mixed tenure, and it works financially as well, Kasim.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And on that note, now just 1 minute past 9 in the evening, we have item 9 and item 10, and of course, work program item 11. I'm afraid those 3 items will be moved to the next meeting agenda. And for this time, I think it's been a great evening, despite the difficulties that I had in the evening when the laptop crashed and I have to survive with iPad. But we've managed to get it and we hold our nerves. I would like you to thank, please to join me to thank our officers who not only have written the reports, but also have managed to the scrutiny to go well and virtually. Please do join me thanking the officers, please. Thank you very much. And again, members of the public and who've been with us, and members of residents of RBKC who've been with us for the last 2.5 hours, we will continue to do our scrutiny the best we can, rather than just for the party politics, but also for the residents, not just for party politics, but for the residents of RBKC. And we will do everything we can, not just to hear from councillors and policymakers, but also researchers to contribute the best way we can scrutinize. And I think on that note, we will be finishing with meeting of this evening, and I would like to thank lead members for taking the time. Kim, thank you again for
taking thank you, Chairman.
Most of the time. Thank you.
And thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you for members who've been getting involved, and especially the Vice Chair, my Vice Chair, Councillor Greg Hammond, who've been very good, supportive, and other officers and scrutiny officers. Very good night to you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ali.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.